"Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," the man on the phone said. "I just bought your house, but according to the county records, you're still listed as the owner." I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the other gripping the cordless phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. At 72 years old, I had learned that confusion sometimes arrived before clarity. But this was different. This wasn't confusion. This was something cold and unsettling settling into my chest. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel Brooks. We spoke briefly through your son a few weeks ago. I purchased the property on Maple Ridge Road." My stomach dropped. Maple Ridge Road was my address. It was the house my late husband and I had spent 38 years paying for. The house where we raised our son Michael. The house where every Christmas photo, every birthday dinner, every family memory seemed to live inside the walls. "There must be some misunderstanding," I replied. "I never sold my house." Silence filled the line for a few seconds. "That's exactly why I'm calling," Daniel finally said. I looked out the kitchen window. The oak tree Robert planted 20 years ago swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Everything outside looked normal, peaceful, familiar, yet suddenly none of it felt secure anymore. "Could you explain what you mean?" I asked. "I received copies of the transaction paperwork," Daniel said. "Everything appeared legitimate. Your son handled most of the communication. But when I visited the county office this morning to verify some records, they informed me the property is still legally under your name." My heart began to pound. Michael handled most of the communication. The words echoed in my head. My son had been helping me with paperwork ever since Robert passed away 5 years earlier. At least that's what I believed. He paid bills online. He reviewed documents. He explained forms that seemed increasingly complicated each year. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. "Are you still there?" Daniel asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here." I lowered myself into a chair beside the kitchen table. The same table where Robert used to drink coffee every morning before work. The same table where Michael did his homework as a boy. Suddenly, every memory felt fragile. "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniel continued gently, "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just thought you deserved to know something doesn't add up." I closed my eyes. 2 weeks earlier, Michael and his wife Vanessa had insisted on taking me out for dinner. They had been unusually attentive. Vanessa had complimented my cooking. Michael had asked about old family documents. At the time, I thought they were simply being thoughtful. Now those conversations returned to me with a different meaning. "Could you send me copies of whatever paperwork you have?" I asked. "Of course," Daniel replied. "I'll email everything immediately." After we ended the call, I remained seated for several minutes. The kitchen clock ticked steadily above the refrigerator. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments. Yet my entire world suddenly felt tilted. Then my phone chimed. An email notification. Daniel had already sent the documents. My hands trembled as I opened the first attachment. There it was. My address. My property. My home. Beneath the legal description sat a signature bearing my name. Eleanor Whitmore. I stared at it. I studied every curve and line. It looked almost right. Almost. But it wasn't mine. I knew my own handwriting. I knew every letter, every stroke, every habit formed over decades. Someone had signed my name. Someone had sold my house without telling me. And as I continued scrolling through the pages, a terrible realization began to form. This wasn't the work of a stranger. Whoever had done this knew too much. They knew my property. They knew my records. They knew exactly how to make everything appear real. I looked toward the family photographs displayed across the living room shelf. Michael smiled back at me from dozens of frames spanning 45 years of memories. For the first time in my life, I found myself asking a question I never imagined I would ask. How much did my own son know? I did not sleep that night. The documents sat open on my dining room table long after the sun had disappeared behind the trees. Every few minutes I picked them up again, hoping I had misunderstood something. Hoping I would suddenly notice a detail that explained everything. But each time I looked at the signature, the feeling only grew stronger. It was not mine. Around midnight, I carried the papers into the living room and sat in Robert's old recliner. The leather had softened over the years, molded by decades of use. Whenever life became difficult, Robert would sit there and think quietly before making a decision. I found myself doing the same. The family photographs lining the mantel seemed to watch me from across the room. There was Michael at age 8, proudly holding a Little League trophy. There he was again at his college graduation. Then his wedding day, smiling beside Vanessa beneath a white arch covered in flowers. Looking at those pictures hurt more than I expected. I kept asking myself the same question. If Michael knew about this, when had everything changed? The next morning, I woke before sunrise. A thin layer of fog covered the backyard. The oak tree stood motionless against the pale sky. I made coffee and tried to steady my thoughts. That was when memories from the previous few weeks began returning to me. Small moments, little conversations, things that had seemed ordinary at the time. 2 weeks earlier, Michael had stopped by unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. He brought sandwiches from my favorite deli and spent nearly 3 hours with me. At the time, I felt grateful. Lately, his visits had become less frequent, so his attention felt like a gift. During lunch, he casually asked where I kept important documents. I remember laughing and telling him he sounded like a financial advisor. He smiled and said he only wanted to make sure everything would be organized someday. A few days later, Vanessa came over carrying a basket of homemade muffins. She insisted on helping me clean the hall closet. While we worked, she asked several questions about the house. Had I ever considered downsizing? Was maintaining the property becoming difficult? Did I know how much homes in the neighborhood were selling for? None of it seemed suspicious then. Many people my age discussed those things. Looking back now, every question felt different. Every smile felt rehearsed. Then there was the envelope. I remembered it suddenly while standing at the kitchen sink. About 10 days earlier, I had found an official-looking envelope from the county on my front porch. Before I could open it, Michael arrived. He glanced at the return address and immediately offered to handle it for me. He said government paperwork was usually confusing and promised to explain everything later. I never saw that envelope again. The realization made my stomach tighten. One memory connected to another. One detail led to the next. Like pieces of a puzzle slowly locking together. By late morning, I knew I could not ignore what was happening. I retrieved the documents Daniel had sent and carefully placed them into a folder. Then I opened my address book and found the number of the attorney Robert had trusted for years. My finger hovered over the call button for several seconds. Deep down, I was afraid of what I might learn. But I was even more afraid of doing nothing. So I took a deep breath and made the call. Robert Hayes answered on the third ring. His voice sounded exactly as I remembered it, calm, measured, and reassuring. He had handled legal matters for Robert and me for nearly 3 decades. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was him. After I explained the situation, he became very quiet. When I finished, he asked only one question. Do you still have the documents? Every page, I replied. Good, he said. Bring everything to my office this afternoon. Do not discuss this with anyone until we have reviewed the paperwork. His choice of words caught my attention. Not Michael, not Vanessa, anyone. By 1 o'clock, I was sitting across from him in a conference room overlooking downtown Columbus. Sunlight streamed through the windows while Robert carefully examined each document. He read slowly, occasionally making notes, occasionally adjusting his glasses. The longer he looked, the more concerned he appeared. Finally, he set the papers down and folded his hands. Eleanor, he said, the signature is not authentic. Hearing the words spoken aloud sent a chill through me. Part of me had still hoped there might be another explanation. A clerical mistake. A misunderstanding. Something innocent. That hope disappeared immediately. Can you prove it? I asked. Most likely, yes. He turned one of the pages toward me and pointed to a section near the bottom. There are several irregularities here. The signature itself is questionable, but there is more. He explained that the notary information appeared inconsistent with official records. The witness documentation contained unusual formatting. Even some of the dates did not align properly. Individually, each issue might have been overlooked. Together, they created a troubling picture. Someone worked very hard to make this appear legitimate, Robert said. I stared down at the documents. Then why would the county still show me as the owner? Robert leaned back in his chair. That is the interesting part. He opened another folder from his desk and removed several pages. Because whoever attempted this transaction never completed every legal step required for ownership transfer. My pulse quickened, meaning the sale may have been presented as completed, but legally it remains defective. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. Tiny, fragile, but real. Robert continued reviewing records while I waited. About 20 minutes later, he paused and frowned. What is it? I asked. He slid a document across the table. It was a power of attorney authorization. At least, it appeared to be one. My name was printed near the top. I immediately knew I had never seen it before. This document would have allowed another person to act on your behalf in property transactions, Robert explained. Have you ever signed anything similar? Never. His expression hardened. Then we have a serious problem. I felt the room grow strangely quiet. Outside the windows, traffic continued moving through the city. People walked along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Normal lives. Normal afternoons. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of recent months seemed to be unraveling. Robert closed the file and looked directly at me. There is something else you should know. My stomach tightened again. What? The authorization names an individual who was supposedly representing your interests during the sale. I swallowed hard. Who? He turned the page around. I looked down at the printed name. For several seconds, I could not speak. Then I read it again to make sure I was not mistaken. The representative listed on the document was Michael Whitmore. For several seconds, I simply stared at the name. Michael Whitmore. My son. The little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The young man whose college tuition Robert and I had worked overtime to help pay. The father of my future grandchildren, or so I had always hoped. Seeing his name on that document felt unreal, as if someone had placed it there as part of a terrible mistake. There has to be another explanation, I said quietly. Robert did not answer immediately. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before speaking. I understand why you want to believe that, Eleanor. But right now we need to focus on facts. Facts. The word landed heavily. Facts did not care about feelings. Facts did not care about memories. Facts simply existed. And the fact sitting in front of me was that Michael's name appeared on paperwork connected to an attempted sale of my home. Robert spent the next hour gathering records. He contacted the county office, requested additional filings, and reviewed every document associated with the transaction. I sat quietly across from him, watching the pieces slowly come together. By late afternoon, another pattern began to emerge. Several emails connected to the sale originated from an account that listed Michael as the primary contact. There were also phone records showing repeated communication between Michael and Daniel Brooks during the negotiation process. None of it proved criminal intent. None of it explained everything. But it painted a picture I could no longer ignore. When I finally left Robert's office, the sky had turned gray. A light rain had begun falling across the city. I drove home slowly, my windshield wipers moving back and forth in a steady rhythm. During the drive, I thought about the previous year. Michael and Vanessa had seemed unusually interested in my finances. They often asked whether I had updated my estate plans. They frequently discussed rising property values. Once, Vanessa even joked that my house was worth more than many people's retirement accounts. At the time, I had laughed. Now I wondered if she had been testing the waters. When I arrived home, I noticed a familiar SUV parked in my driveway. My heart skipped. Michael and Vanessa were standing on the front porch. Vanessa smiled the moment she saw me. "There you are," she said cheerfully. "We tried calling." I forced a small smile and unlocked the front door. I was running errands. Michael stepped inside carrying a paper bag from a local bakery. "We brought your favorite cinnamon rolls." The gesture would have warmed my heart a month earlier. Now it felt different. Not because the rolls themselves had changed, but because I had. Every word they spoke seemed to carry hidden weight. Every glance felt significant. We sat around the kitchen table while Vanessa poured coffee. Michael talked about work. Vanessa discussed a neighbor who had recently sold her house. I listened carefully. Then came the moment that made my pulse quicken. "Have you given any more thought to simplifying things?" Vanessa asked casually. "You know, less responsibility, less maintenance." I stirred my coffee slowly. "What do you mean?" "Maybe moving somewhere smaller eventually," she said. "A nice condo. Something easier." Michael nodded. "You deserve to enjoy retirement without worrying about a big property." I looked at both of them. Their expressions appeared sincere, friendly, concerned. Yet something deep inside me no longer trusted what I was seeing. So I did something unexpected. I smiled warmly and nodded. "You know," I said, "I think you might be right." The relief that flashed across their faces lasted less than a second. But I saw it. And in that brief moment, I realized I was no longer the only person keeping secrets. After Michael and Vanessa left that evening, I stood at the kitchen window and watched their SUV disappear down the street. The porch light reflected softly against the wet pavement, and for a long moment I simply stood there holding my coffee cup. My hands were steady now. The shock that had consumed me during the previous days was slowly being replaced by something else. Clarity. The next morning, Robert called before 9 o'clock. "I found something," he said. His voice carried an energy I had not heard before. "Can you come in?" An hour later, I was back in his office. He handed me a thin folder and pointed to several highlighted pages. "Your husband was more careful than most people realized." I looked down at the documents. Many of them were unfamiliar. "What am I looking at?" Robert smiled slightly. "Protection." He explained that shortly before Robert passed away, he had updated several legal documents connected to our property and financial accounts. At the time, my husband never mentioned the details because he believed everything would remain simple. He trusted our family. Still, he believed in preparation. One document in particular caught my attention. It contained a clause requiring direct confirmation from me before any permanent transfer involving the property could be completed. "That should have prevented this entire situation," I said. "Normally, yes," Robert replied, "which tells me someone attempted to work around the safeguards." The words settled heavily between us. Someone, not a stranger, not an anonymous scammer. Someone who understood how our family affairs were organized. Before leaving, Robert advised patience. "Do not confront them yet," he said. "People reveal more when they believe they are succeeding." During the following week, I followed his advice. I acted exactly as Michael and Vanessa expected. I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by maintaining the house. I talked about how difficult yard work had become. I even commented that perhaps a smaller place would be easier someday. Each time, they seemed encouraged. Vanessa especially. She began sending me listings for retirement communities and condominium developments. Some were nearly 40 miles away, far enough that regular visits would become inconvenient. One Friday afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. Michael called while driving home from work. He accidentally left the call connected after saying goodbye. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then I heard voices. Michael and Vanessa were discussing finances. I could not hear every word clearly, but I heard enough. They talked about future plans, a larger home, vacation travel, new investments. Then Vanessa said something that made my breath catch. "Once everything is finalized, we will not have to worry about money anymore." There was a brief silence before Michael answered. "Just be patient. We are almost there." The line disconnected a few seconds later. I sat motionless at the dining room table. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the lawn Robert once loved to mow every Saturday morning. Inside, another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. That evening, I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom. Inside were photographs, letters, and keepsakes collected during 43 years of marriage. Near the bottom rested a sealed envelope in Robert's handwriting. I remembered seeing it years earlier, but never opening it. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted it from the box. Something told me that whatever was inside might explain far more than I realized. The envelope was yellowed with age, its edges slightly worn from years of being moved from one safe place to another. Robert's handwriting covered the front in neat blue ink. It simply read, "For Eleanor. Only if something does not feel right." I sat on the edge of my bed staring at those words. My husband had always been practical. He believed problems could be solved if people remained calm and paid attention. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and several folded documents. The letter was only 2 pages long, but I recognized Robert's voice immediately in every sentence. He explained that after retiring, he had become concerned about how often older homeowners were targeted by dishonest schemes. He was not worried about strangers. He was worried about pressure, influence, and poor decisions made during difficult times. That was why he had worked with Robert Hayes to establish additional protections around the house and several financial accounts. Then I reached a paragraph that made me stop reading. "If anyone ever tries to convince you that you are incapable of managing your affairs, slow down and ask questions. The people who truly care about you will never rush you." I read the sentence 3 times. During the previous month alone, Michael and Vanessa had repeatedly suggested that I simplify my life. They spoke about convenience, about reducing responsibilities, about letting others handle complicated matters. Until now, I had viewed those conversations through the lens of trust. Suddenly, they looked very different. Beneath the letter sat copies of legal filings. One document outlined a notification requirement that Robert had mentioned earlier. Another established a review procedure triggered whenever unusual activity involving the property occurred. Most important of all was a confidential contact authorization listing Robert Hayes as the person responsible for receiving alerts connected to ownership changes. I immediately understood why the transaction had stalled before completion. Robert's safeguards had done exactly what they were designed to do. Someone had managed to begin the process, but they had failed to fully bypass every protection. The next morning, I met Robert Hayes again. This time I brought the envelope. He examined the documents carefully before nodding. "This explains several things," he said, "and it gives us an advantage." "What kind of advantage?" I asked. Robert leaned forward. "The people involved believe they are close to succeeding. That confidence may cause them to become careless." Later that afternoon, another unexpected development occurred. Daniel Brooks called again. Over the previous week, he had become increasingly concerned after learning about the irregularities surrounding the sale. Unlike many buyers, he seemed genuinely troubled by the possibility that something improper had occurred. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "there is something you should know." My heart quickened. "What is it?" "I received an email this morning asking when I plan to take possession of the property." I gripped the phone tighter. "Who sent it?" There was a brief pause. Then he answered, "Vanessa Whitmore." I closed my eyes. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the backyard. Birds moved between the branches of Robert's oak tree. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet beneath that calm surface, events were accelerating. Daniel continued speaking. Vanessa had written as though the sale were already complete. She discussed timelines, future plans, scheduling arrangements. Most revealing of all, she seemed entirely confident there would be no obstacles remaining. When the call ended, I sat quietly in the living room. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer searching for answers. The answers were beginning to find me. Over the next several days, I followed Robert's advice exactly. I did not accuse anyone. I did not reveal what I knew. Most importantly, I did not change my routine. Every morning, I watered the flowers along the front walkway. Every afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. Every Sunday, I attended church and chatted with the same friends I had known for years. From the outside, my life appeared completely unchanged. Meanwhile, Michael and Vanessa grew increasingly confident. Their visits became more frequent. Their questions became more direct. One evening, Vanessa arrived carrying a folder filled with brochures from retirement communities. She spread them across my kitchen table with the enthusiasm of someone planning a vacation. "This one has a fitness center," she said, "and this community offers transportation services." I nodded politely while turning pages. "They all look very nice." Her smile widened. "I thought you would like them." Michael arrived a few minutes later. During dinner, he casually mentioned that homes in my neighborhood were selling quickly. "The market is strong right now," he said. "People are paying premium prices." I stirred my soup slowly. "That is good for homeowners, I suppose." I noticed Vanessa glance at him. The look lasted only a second, but it was enough. They were waiting for something. Waiting for me to take the next step. Waiting for me to make their job easier. Instead, I continued playing my role. 2 days later, Robert called with an update. His investigation had uncovered additional records connected to the attempted transaction. More importantly, he had identified a scheduled closing meeting that had quietly been postponed rather than canceled. "They still believe this can be completed," he said, "which means they may expose even more information before this is over." The following Friday provided exactly that opportunity. Michael invited me to lunch at a small restaurant outside town. It was unusual. For years, our conversations had been rushed and squeezed between work obligations. Now he suddenly seemed eager to spend time together. During the meal, he repeatedly asked how I was feeling about the future. Did I ever feel lonely in such a large house? Did I worry about maintenance costs? Did I think about moving closer to services and conveniences? I answered carefully. Sometimes I do. The relief that crossed his face was impossible to miss. After lunch, he drove me home. As we pulled into the driveway, he looked at the house for several seconds. Then he smiled. "You know, Mom, sometimes change is not a bad thing." I smiled back. Sometimes it is not. That evening, I received another call from Daniel Brooks. His voice sounded tense. Mrs. Whitmore, I thought you should know something. My heart immediately quickened. What happened? I received another email today. From Vanessa? Yes. He paused. She asked me to prepare for possession within the next 2 weeks. I walked to the living room window and looked out at Robert's oak tree standing proudly against the sunset. Did she say anything else? Only that everything was finally coming together. After the call ended, I sat quietly in Robert's old recliner. For the first time since this began, I felt certain about one thing. Michael and Vanessa no longer suspected any obstacles remained. They believed victory was close. They believed the house was already slipping from my hands. What they did not realize was that every step they took brought them closer to revealing the entire truth themselves. The call from Robert came early Monday morning. It is time, he said. His voice was calm, but there was a certainty behind it that immediately caught my attention. The meeting has been scheduled for Thursday at 10 o'clock. I knew exactly which meeting he meant. The final gathering everyone had been quietly moving toward. For the next 3 days, I continued my routine exactly as before. I baked banana bread. I watered the roses. I attended my church book club. Meanwhile, Michael and Vanessa seemed happier than I had seen them in years. Vanessa spoke constantly about future plans, new beginnings, fresh opportunities. Michael appeared relaxed, almost relieved. Watching them was painful in a way I had not expected. Part of me still remembered the little boy who used to run through this house, carrying toy trucks. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding waiting to be uncovered. But every new document, every new conversation, every new discovery had pushed that possibility further away. Thursday morning arrived cool and clear. Sunlight filtered through the oak tree outside my bedroom window. I stood there for a moment before leaving, remembering how Robert used to say that difficult days should be met with a steady heart. At 9:30, I arrived at Robert Hayes's office. Daniel Brooks was already there. He greeted me warmly and apologized once again for everything that had happened. I never wanted to be involved in something like this, he said. I know, I replied. That is why I trust you. 10 minutes later, Michael and Vanessa entered the conference room. Both looked surprised to see me sitting at the table. Vanessa recovered first. Eleanor, she said brightly, we did not know you were coming. I smiled politely. Neither did I until recently. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Robert entered carrying several folders and took his seat at the head of the table. The room became quiet. For a few moments, only the faint hum of the building's air conditioning could be heard. Then Robert began reviewing the transaction. He spoke carefully, methodically, moving through the paperwork page by page. At first, Michael appeared confident. Vanessa occasionally nodded along. But gradually their expressions began to change. Robert presented the irregular signatures, then the incomplete filings, then the notification requirements established years earlier. Finally, he produced the documents from Robert's letter and placed them on the table. These safeguards were never satisfied, he explained. As a result, ownership of the property never legally transferred. Silence followed. Daniel looked down at the paperwork. Michael stared at the table. Vanessa's face had lost all color. Robert continued. Furthermore, evidence indicates unauthorized representations were made during the transaction process. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The truth seemed to fill every corner of the room. Then Daniel cleared his throat and turned toward me. For the record, he said, the county records remain accurate. He paused briefly before continuing. Mrs. Whitmore is still the sole legal owner of the property. Hearing those words felt strangely quiet. There was no dramatic celebration, no raised voices, no sudden triumph, just relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. Across the table, Michael slowly lowered his eyes. Vanessa sat completely still, and for the first time since this nightmare began, neither of them looked certain about what would happen next. The meeting ended quietly. No one rushed for the door. No one argued. The truth had settled over the room like a heavy blanket, leaving everyone with nothing meaningful left to say. I gathered my folder and stood. For a moment, Michael looked as though he wanted to speak. Then he looked away. Vanessa remained seated, staring at the documents spread across the table. As I walked toward the exit, Daniel stood and offered his hand. I shook it warmly. In a strange way, the man who had nearly purchased my home had shown me more honesty than some of the people I trusted most. Outside, the afternoon air felt fresh and clean. The The sky stretched bright blue above the city, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe normally again. Robert walked beside me to the parking lot. Before we parted, he handed me a copy of the final legal summary. "Everything is secure," he said. "Your ownership is fully protected." I smiled. Robert would have appreciated that. He nodded. I think he planned it that way. The drive home felt different from every drive I had taken during the previous month. The roads were the same. The buildings were the same. But the weight I had been carrying was finally gone. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes simply looking at the house. The white shutters, the flower beds, the porch swing Robert built with his own hands one summer nearly 20 years ago. It was still mine. Not because of luck, not because of a technicality, because the truth mattered, because preparation mattered, because one thoughtful man had cared enough to protect the future of the woman he loved. That evening, I walked slowly through every room. The living room where Michael opened Christmas presents as a child. The kitchen where countless family dinners had been shared. The hallway covered with photographs spanning decades. Each space carried memories. Some joyful, some painful, but they belonged to me. Later, as the sun began to set, I sat beneath the oak tree Robert planted years earlier. The same tree that had silently witnessed everything. A gentle breeze moved through its branches. For a long time, I simply listened. Not to voices, not to explanations, just to the quiet. Michael called 2 days later. His voice sounded tired, older somehow. We spoke for nearly 30 minutes. He apologized. More than once. I listened carefully. I did not raise my voice. I did not lecture him. Some wounds require time rather than arguments. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired in a single conversation. By the end of the call, I told him something simple. The door is not closed, Michael, but it is no longer unlocked. He was silent for several seconds before saying he understood. Whether he truly did, only time would tell. As for Vanessa, I received a brief letter several weeks later. It contained an apology and little else. I accepted it for what it was and moved forward. Life is too short to spend every day looking backward. Today, I still live in the same house on Maple Ridge Road. Every morning, I drink my coffee on the porch. Every spring, I plant flowers beside the walkway. Every autumn, I watch leaves fall from Robert's oak tree. And whenever I think about everything that happened, I remember the lesson hidden inside it all. The people who truly care about you will never rush you. They will never pressure you. They will never treat your trust as an opportunity. Sometimes the greatest